Howdy my totally always tubular gamers, we're back with, you guessed it, another video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. If you're new here, maybe stick around for a while. I got a fun ranking video for you. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the modern Sony games. Now I'm sure when you clicked on this video you probably went, what exactly does this guy mean? Is he talking about all the like cinematic third person games by Sony? Is he talking about the PS5 exclusives? Is he talking about all the first party games by Sony that came out recently? Well, the answer is actually no to all of those. What I'm going to be ranking is every new game that was published by Sony Interactive Entertainment that has come out for the PS5. It doesn't matter if it's an exclusive, it doesn't matter if it was developed by a first or second party. What matters is that it was published by Sony Interactive Entertainment and released on the PS5. If it was published by SIE and it's not a re-release, then it's going to be on this list. Remakes are okay though. And so now your question probably is, so wait, what games is he going to be covering? I'm going to be covering basically every Sony game from 2020 and on. If it's on the PS5, it's getting talked about. Again, I'm not talking about re-releases. I'm not talking about director's cut versions of games. I'm not talking about the PS classics that have shown up. I'm not talking about PS4 games. I'm also not talking about PlayStation VR games. I don't have either of the VR headsets and have no desire to get one. I am talking about just PS5 games published by SIE. You know, originally I was going to do first party games, but then I realized that wouldn't include games like Helldivers 2 and Stellar Blade and even Sackboy Big Adventure. So yeah, every game published by SIE. Hopefully in the future I can do like every PS4 game published by SIE. Or maybe the last like 10 years of Sony games, but at this time I haven't played every Sony game from the last 10 years. I've actually yet to play either of the Gravity Rush games or Knack 1 and 2. If you really want to know what's holding me up from doing that today, it's just the PS5 games. Okay, I've said it a few times now. Hopefully everyone understands what I mean by modern Sony games and which games I'm going to be talking about. So let's move along. I'm going to be ranking these games worst to best, giving each one of them a little review. This is just all coming from my own personal experience. I have played all of these and enjoyed almost all of them, and I've even had the pleasure of being a part of a few of these games' productions, including God of War Ragnarok, several MLB The Show games, Horizon Forbidden West, Spider-Man 2, and now Helldivers 2 as well. And while I can't really share what it was like being part of those games' productions, at least I can share my thoughts on the games themselves, and don't expect to see me in any more modern SIE games, as I sadly was let go last year, with the last game I was a part of being Helldivers 2. And with that in mind, you know, this intro's gone on pretty long. Let's just get right into it. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the super thanks and the Patreon. Anything is truly and greatly appreciated. Let me know down below what your favorite PS5 games or your favorite modern Sony games are. I'm always lurking in the comments, and I really do love all the support you all give me. Seriously, thank you so much. I really do love it. The ability to have this platform and talk about games, even games I got to be a part of, it's nothing short of amazing. So, former SIE employee ranks all of SIE's modern games. Let's get it. So with all that in mind, what is the worst of the modern Sony games? I believe the worst of the modern Sony games is Destruction AllStars. It came out in 2021 and was developed by Lucid Games, and it's one of the very few real PS5 exclusive games. It can only be played on PS5, and sadly, it's not very good. I remember having a mild amount of hype for this one. I was like, oh, a new car combat game by Sony. I mean, it's not Twisted Metal, but maybe it could lead to a Twisted Metal, and then it got delayed, and then it came out as like a PlayStation Plus game, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll try this, and didn't really like it very much. And a few years later, my thoughts haven't exactly changed. I'm not really a big fan on this game, and I wanted to be because I do love car combat games, I love driving games, but this game, it isn't it. So the game doesn't have a real plot or story to it. You really are just dropped into these arenas and are told to just destroy everything. There's several different all-stars you can pick, each with their own unique abilities, and the point of the game really is to destroy each other. Like, there are some other game modes with different objectives, but at the end of the day, really a majority of the gameplay is just crashing into each other. It's all about the destruction, baby. But something that sets this game apart from other vehicular combat games is the fact that you can actually get out of the car. There's a few reasons why you'd want to get out of the car. There's an entire platforming and parkour system, or maybe your car is going to be totaled and so you just want to bail. And each of the characters actually do have their own unique ability on foot, and they can summon these like supercars. I'll just say, when it comes to the driving, the feel, and the handling of this game, it's actually very well done. It's the best part of this game. The cars actually feel nice. Being on foot and the parkouring feels nice. I think it's cool how many different characters they are, how different they all feel from each other, and you can actually summon some pretty cool looking cars. And some of the special abilities are actually pretty fun to use, like when you get the buzzsaw and you just slice the other cars in half. That is cool. It's actually satisfying. The core gameplay at times is actually fun. Sure, it's not the most complex, there isn't much depth, and it's about as simplistic as bumper cars. And hey, sometimes there is fun in simplicity. You can have a few hours of fun, but it doesn't exactly mean there's going to be a long shelf life, and this game is predominantly multiplayer based, and yeah, there's not a lot of people playing this game nowadays. I'm not going to say the game's totally dead, but you might be waiting a while. Hopefully you aren't waiting for one of the shittier game modes. I remember just not really liking any of the game modes. I just kind of wanted to smash into each other, and these game modes try to have you do other objectives, and I really just wasn't feeling it. My favorite game mode was the one where you collect the gears, because it really did incentivize you destroying the other cars, you know, the name of the game. And I'm not going to say all the other game modes were absolutely horrible. You totally could have some fun with them, but I just really wasn't digging them. When it came to the arenas themselves, I mean, I couldn't tell you any of them. They were all super just generic and there, and you know, I like how different all the characters are, but I remember it was like seriously unbalanced. Some of the characters' abilities were just like low-key useless, especially compared to, say, the buzzsaw, which was just stupid good and really fun to use. Now, despite being predominantly multiplayer, there is actually a single player mode. It's like these challenges, and these, yeah, I wasn't really big on these at all. I didn't find these very fun, and I feel like they weren't taking full advantage of the game. And then they also wanted you to pay for a bunch of them, and I was like, yeah, I don't like this game enough to buy anything for it. The game is filled to the brim with microtransactions. It honestly feels like a free-to-play game. There's so many microtransactions, and I was just like, I really am not picking up what this game is putting down. You're not going to see me spend a single cent on it. I played it for a few hours and dropped it pretty quick. It's not absolutely awful, but I certainly could not recommend this game. Even to people who like vehicular combat games, I still wouldn't recommend it, and it's easily the worst game SIE's put out on the PS5. And so our next game is not just one game, it's actually 4 games, and that is MLB The Show 21, 22, 23, and 24. All of these were developed by the San Diego studio and published by SIE on PS5. Funny enough, they're on Xbox and Switch as well now, and these are baseball games. I'm not going to act like I'm all that well versed in baseball games. You know, I remember the Slugfest series. I love Mario Baseball, and when it comes to modern baseball games, I don't think there are any better than The Show. It really is the best modern baseball gameplay, and then there's so much love and attention given to MLB itself with like its history modes, the presentation's great, and it doesn't just feel like a shitty update every year like several other sports games. These games actually do add new things, which is pretty cool. I'm not going to act like I've put a ton of time into these, but I have tried them since I was part of the production process, and yeah, they are pretty cool games. If you like baseball, I really do think these games are worth checking out. They're not going to be too high on this list because yeah, I would rather play all the other games on this list going forward, and I don't really care for sports games. I'd much rather play this than FIFA or Madden, though at least this is actually good. And so here we have Sackboy: A Big Adventure, which was actually a PS5 launch title. The game was developed by Sumo Digital and not Media Molecule, and it is actually a 3D platformer. It is a bit different than the Little Big Planet games, and I'd say it's actually most comparable to Super Mario 3D World, especially when it comes to the camera angle, the progression, how level focused it is, and really just the design in general. But despite at times feeling like we have Super Mario 3D World at home, I do think this is a pretty solid 3D platformer. It's not going to wow you, especially if you're a big fan of the genre, but it's a decent time, and it's always cool to see a AAA platformer. The game actually does have a plot to it. It takes place in Craft World, and it sees the Sack people just living peacefully until this new villain Vex shows up really to just wreck everything, and so it's up to Sackboy to stop him. And sadly, he has no connection to the other 3D platformer character known as Vex. I'm sure all 5 people that played that game understood that reference. The story, it's pretty basic. It's just kind of there. It's just a means for you to move forward. There's some funny little quips and dialogue, and the game is generally pretty lighthearted. It's not going for a really deep, immersive narrative or anything like that, and that's probably not why you're playing this game. You're playing it to play a pretty chill 3D platformer, and that's exactly what this game is. You play exclusively as Sackboy. I mean, it is his big adventure, and you go level to level. There is a world map that you can kind of explore, but really it could have easily been a menu. But yeah, the game is very level focused in its structure. They try to make each level feel a little different from each other. They try to introduce gimmicks or themes and try to really just throw some variety in there. And I mean, yeah, most of the levels do feel different from each other. You go to a variety of different worlds, at least visually they're all different from each other. but I'm not going to come out here and say these are some of the best 3D platformer levels you could ever play in a game, because it's simply not that. A lot of these levels, while I think they're fine, I don't think a lot of them really go past fine. The ones that really stuck out to me were all the music focused ones. This game has plenty of licensed music, and a lot of the time the level really is moving to the beat. It really reminds me of Hi-Fi Rush, but it's nowhere near as immersive or well done as Hi-Fi Rush, where literally everything moved to the beat. No, they just try to kind of keep it to a beat, and yeah, it's alright. It made things a little bit more memorable. Outside of those levels though, to be honest with you, I really couldn't recall a lot of the levels. They just kind of emptied out of my head rather quickly, which probably says a bit about the game's quality or my memory. Like, these aren't bad levels. I wouldn't say this game really has any bad levels. It's just a lot of them are just really there. Like, not bad, not good, just kind of existing, and you play through them and you're like, that was a level, and then you move on to the next one and hopefully it's a little bit better, and oftentimes it's really not. Sometimes they do introduce gimmicks that again make things a bit more interesting, but Sackboy's moveset just isn't all that interesting to begin with. They give you some power-ups, but I feel like these power-ups don't really reach their full potential, and I feel like they could have done way more with these power-ups, or maybe combine some of these power-ups to create some really memorable, interesting, engaging levels, but this game just doesn't really do that for the most part. A lot of these levels, I'll be frank, just kidding, I'm always Jonathan, but seriously, sometimes these levels, they can be a bit dull. What makes them more interesting is the collectibles. You will need to actually collect some of this stuff to progress further. You don't just beat the level and move on. The game needs you to collect a certain amount of these orbs, and you might even have to replay levels if you're missing a bunch of them. You need a certain amount to beat the game. On top of this, you find new costumes for Sackboy, and it's always fun to customize Sackboy. That will always be great, and you can put him in some really ridiculous stuff. I love that level of customization. Unfortunately, that's really where the customization ends. This game does not actually have any content creation. You can't create levels or challenges for other players, which is a real shame, because I think this game really would have benefited from it, and that was always my favorite part of Little Big Planet. I know this is a Sackboy game, not a Little Big Planet game, and it's a real shame what happened to Little Big Planet 3, so it hurts just a little bit more that there's really no content creation at all here, and I'm sure we would have gotten some kick-ass levels, but that's not what this game is. It is much more of a traditional 3D platformer, and traditional is a great way to describe this game. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, it doesn't push the genre forward, it's not all that different from really any other 3D platformer. It just has a cute aesthetic, one of PlayStation's best mascots, and some solid controls. It doesn't have like a massive issue or all these big gaping flaws. No, really the biggest issue I have with this game is the boss fights. The boss fights aren't very good. They're just way too easy, and I really just kind of wanted them to end, but outside of that, yeah, there's nothing massively wrong with this game. It still has plenty going for it. It's really easy to pick up and play and understand. And it does have some decent levels, it's just a lot of them really didn't impress me. The game does have co-op as well. It was added later, so you can even play online now, so that's cool, and it definitely makes it feel like Super Mario 3D World. And that game had way better levels.
You need to shut the fuck up!
Okay, outside of the obvious comparison, if you're looking for a chill 3D platformer, especially if you have younger ones, this is probably a great pick. It's not really going to challenge you, but you absolutely still can have some fun with the game. The game controls great, it looks really nice, it has a pretty good soundtrack, and it still is fun at the end of the day. I've been a bit harsh on this game, but I'll still say I did enjoy my time with it. I don't regret it. I would rather play several other Little Big Planet games, but that isn't exactly an option these days, RIP LBP3, but hey, at the very least, PlayStation hasn't forgotten who Sackboy is, so that's a W, right? The game is pretty cheap, it's available on Steam now, which I really didn't expect, and again, if you're looking for just a really chill 3D platformer, this is a good one to play. It's not going to wow you, especially if you're a big fan of the genre. There have been several other 3D platformers, especially indie ones, that have come out in the last few years that are much better than this in my opinion, but it's still a good time. And so here we have Rise of the Ronin, which came out in 2024. Now this game was developed by Team Ninja, who very much are not a Sony first party, but this game was published by SIE and is on the PS5, and like I stated 10,000 times in the intro, that means it will be on this list. Now I was pretty excited for this game. I have always loved Team Ninja's games. I love Neo 1 and 2. Wolong and Strangers of Paradise were alright, but I had a decent level of hype for this game. However, after playing all the way through it, I'm a bit more mixed on it. I still do like it and think that this game does a few things that are actually pretty great, but there are some things I really don't care for in this game. When it comes to the setting and the story, it takes place in the mid-19th century during the final years of the Edo period. and the game really depicts the lead up to the Boshin War, where there was the shogunate and the anti-shogunate forces who didn't like that Japan opened up to Western influence after so many years of not being open to Western influence, and so a bunch of foreigners showed up. But the main story follows the Blade twins. You get to completely customize your character at the beginning of the game, and you get to choose which gender you want to play as and their involvement in a resistance group, and really at the end of the day they're just trying to overthrow the shogunate. I think the setting is actually quite interesting with this game, and I think the initial premise is good. I think on paper the story's pretty good, but on paper and execution are very different things. Now, I have played nearly every Team Ninja game under the sun, and I can tell you they all share the same issue. They just don't have very good stories. Ninja Gaiden, Nioh, Wolong, Stranger of Paradise, the story in these games just isn't very good. And it's not like it's just one issue throughout, it's usually a variety of issues, and Rise of the Ronin is no exception to this rule. I don't think the story is very good in this game. I just really failed to get invested in this game's story or world or characters. I just didn't think any of the characters were all that interesting or good. The writing just isn't all that great, and I really just didn't find any of the set pieces or characters or moments all that memorable. I can barely recall anything that happens in this story. It just feels like there's a ton of political bickering the entire time, and it really failed to grab my interest. And it's like the same issue as Nioh and Wolong and Stranger of Paradise's story, where it just really failed to interest me or engage me. At least with Stranger, I was laughing at the cutscenes, and in Wolong and Nioh, usually something cool happens during the cutscenes, like your main character does some cool moves on a monster or something. Here, there's none of that. They really are just talking like the entire time, and I just could not care. And one reason I couldn't care is the English voice acting is terrible in this game. What were they going for here? This just comes off as low-key insensitive. It's some of the worst voice acting you'll find in a modern game. Just change it to Japanese immediately, unlike my dumbass who went through most of the game in English and was like, wow, this voice acting is shit. Like, to the point that it was distracting, and it made me even less interested in the story and these characters. Okay, it's clear I wasn't a fan of that stuff. Let's talk about the actual gameplay before I piss everyone else off. When it comes to the gameplay, this game plays very similar to Wolong, which played pretty similar to Nioh. This game is a Souls-like, but as many people have let me know down below, it's a Nioh-like, where it's a much faster paced, combo heavy Souls-like that really promotes aggressive play. Like, this game wants you to be incredibly aggressive. You can do a ton of quick swipes with weapons. There's a bunch of special moves. You have just this straight up counter move that can be performed really at any time, and you can counter nearly every single attack in this game, like to the point that it's not even funny. They want you to parry and counter everything and then just swipe away. And if you press R1 at the end of your attack or combo string, then you'll get some of your stamina back. They really just want you to wail away at these enemies and just to wear them down incredibly quickly. Like, you can be crazy aggressive in this game and just totally destroy someone's shield or stamina, and then do some kind of epic finisher. And when you parry someone, when you counter someone in this game, it feels so good. It's so rewarding and satisfying. You just go, yeah, that shit felt good. I'll just say immediately, the combat in Rise of Ronin is fantastic. I think it is very good, and I had a ton of fun with the combat. Like, it is easily the best part of this game, hands down. The combat actually has a lot of depth to it. There's a good amount of weapons here, and then there's several different styles you can learn for each weapon as well. Each style has its own special moves and just generally different moveset. Like, all of the styles do feel different from each other. They all play different, and it is so cool to see how many different ways you can fight in this game. Like, I was genuinely kind of surprised with just how many different styles there are. There's even a Ninja Gaiden style. Yeah, there's a Hayabusa style, and you can even do the Hayabusa driver. That's pretty awesome. On top of this, you do have projectiles. You can pull out a bow and arrow, or you can pull out like a little pistol or even a rifle, and these feel great. I thought it felt great in Nioh all those years ago. It feels good now. The shooting actually does feel nice. This combat in general feels so nice. It is rewarding, it is fast, and is just stupidly satisfying. I really could not get enough of this combat, especially the bosses. While you don't fight any mystical creatures like Nioh or Wolong, when you beat some of these bosses, it feels so good. They absolutely did not miss when it comes to this game's combat, but the entire game is not just combat. As much fun as that sounds, there is some actual gameplay here that isn't combat. This is Team Ninja's first open world game, and I'll just be up front, the open world isn't all that good in this game. There's actually a few open worlds and they are of decent size, but this gameplay did not hook me in at all. These open worlds are very dull. They're just incredibly flat and feel almost completely lifeless. The general open world gameplay really isn't different from any open world of the last 20 years. It doesn't feel like this game does anything to diversify itself legit from those open world games of the 360 era. And it doesn't even feel like a fun throwback to older open world games like say Outcast: A New Beginning or Assassin's Creed Mirage might be. This just feels tired. It just felt tired and stale to me almost immediately. Maybe I'm just a little burnt out on open world games or something, but I really was not digging this open world. Like, it just felt really empty and generic to me. There's outposts, there's side missions, you can form bonds with characters, and none of it really got me all that interested or engaged. I tried plenty of the outposts or doing the side missions, and I was like, yeah, these really just aren't that great. It just felt incredibly by the numbers. Go get something from me, bring it back, go help this character defeat an enemy or two, and that's really it when it comes to the side missions. Oh, and you can find these animals to pet. It just didn't grab me. During the story missions, the game does get more linear and it does have actual levels to it that are more akin to say Neo or Wolong, and I'll just be upfront, I never thought Neo or Wolong had great levels to them. I thought they were serviceable and they were alright, and here, I don't even think it's as good as Neo's levels. They're just, again, flat, basic, uninspired. They really don't take advantage of your character's moveset. I mean, you have a grappling hook and a glider, and I feel like it just doesn't take advantage of it. It's not really vertical. You don't get all that many interesting objectives. There's not really any set pieces in these levels outside of some boss fights. The boss fights, while I think they are good, they're not as good as Neo or Wolong's. And at the end of the day, I thought these missions were just forgettable and they really blended in with each other. Like this gameplay you see now, I couldn't tell you anything about this mission. I really couldn't. And I just beat this game a few days ago. Maybe my memory really is shit, but so is the level design for this game. It's just so generic and by the numbers. And the same kind of goes for the side content. This game has a ton of side content to it. If you just do the golden path, stick to the main missions, you'll probably finish it in around 20-25 hours, but if you do a bunch of the side stuff, you can double, triple that. Like, there's probably 100 hours worth of gameplay thanks to all the side content. Whether you're forming the bonds, clearing out the world map, there is a ton to this game that is just kind of ridiculous, and it's all optional. You don't have to do like any of it. This game even has multiplayer. You can do the main missions with friends. I stuck to just the AI since I don't actually really know anybody that got this game, and I'll just say the AI are actually pretty good in this game. The game actually even puts up a challenge. It's not Ninja Gaiden or Neo 1 hard, but yeah, it'll challenge you a few times. It's probably the hardest game to come out all year, but it just makes it all the more satisfying when you beat some of the challenging areas of this game. And with all this, I can really say the combat saves this game. If the combat was not as good as it is, I don't think this would be a very good game. I don't care for the story. I don't really care about all the choices you get to make here. It doesn't seem to change things all that much, and it seems more like an illusion of choice. I don't like the voice acting. The presentation in general just isn't very good in this game. It doesn't look great, and the frame rate kind of craps out sometimes, and I don't think the open world of the level design is all that good. I don't like the skill system, I don't care for the equipment, and I don't like all the randomized crap you get. So what does it have? It has some really great combat with a lot of depth, a lot of rewarding, satisfying moments, and it really just kind of carries the game all the way through. But let's wrap this up. I've been talking about this game for like 10 minutes, but I do have a lot to say about it because I am so mixed. Do I recommend it? I think approach with caution. If you like Neo, if you like Souls-likes, you're going to enjoy this game. Everyone else, probably wait for a sale. It's totally going to come to PC at some point. The combat makes this game worth it, but everything else, you could pretty much just skip it. The game is still good, it's still alright, but I feel like it should have been amazing. It should have been better than it is. But before I piss off everyone else, I'm going to end my rambling and move on to the next game. And so here we have Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, another PS5 launch title back in 2020. I was real excited for this one. I loved the 2018 game by Insomniac, was really excited for another. Got this game with Demon Souls and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and you know what I played first? It was Miles Morales. Okay, after Astro's Playroom, it was Miles Morales. So the game takes place about a year after Marvel's Spider-Man and really sees Miles Morales coming into his own as Spider-Man, with the narrative focusing on Miles' struggle to balance the duties of, his civilian persona and being Spider-Man. And of course, an evil conglomerate shows up in this mysterious new antagonist known as the Tinkerer. I actually really enjoy the story of Miles Morales. It's really well done. Like, Miles is a great character. The way they built him up, he's emotional, his motivation, the way he's written. I actually do enjoy Miles a lot. I can't imagine somebody playing through this game and saying they don't enjoy Miles as a character. Like, I really did like him. He's great. He really does steal the show here. And the villains, like the Tinkerer and the other villains, they're really good too. At times, I'd say the story is even better than Marvel's Spider-Man. Like, it's just incredibly well written. The game is very cinematic. It has some really great characters, emotional moments. Like, I have nothing but a ton of praise for the story of Miles Morales. It's really great in that aspect. And when it comes to the gameplay, it's very similar to Marvel's Spider-Man, or Spider-Man PS4 if you want to call it that. The 2018 game is what I'm trying to say. You're dropped into a relatively big open world. It's not as big as the last games, but a decent sized open world, and there's plenty of main missions to do. There's some side content, there's some collectibles, you can stop random crimes, and you can web sling to your heart's content. And I'll just say the web slinging is fantastic in this game. It is arguably better than 2018 Spider-Man's web slinging. Like, it's really well done. It's incredibly intuitive. It's fluid. The momentum's great. It feels really nice. It's just really fun. The web slinging is just great, and it better be, because you're doing a lot of it in this game. Something else you'll do a lot in this game is, this is a big shocker, and not the character, is combat. You'll get into a lot of combat in this game with plenty of goons, sometimes bosses, and the combat in this game, it's pretty solid. It's arguably better than the 2018 game's combat. Like, it feels pretty nice, It isn't the most complex. It's not Devil May Cry out here. It still is a bit of a beat 'em up that isn't crazy far away from the Arkham games, but it does enough of its own to stand apart from the Arkham games and not just be a copycat or clone or super similar. It really does do its own thing. Obviously, you got plenty of punches and kicks, but Miles has some abilities of his own, and he can use the gadgets to help him out as well, which all diversify the combat and really add a little bit of depth here. Does it have a ton of depth, an ocean's worth of depth? No, it does not. But running in fist first is not the only way to approach combat here. You can actually be stealthy. Miles can even turn invisible for a time in the stealth. It's even better than the last game. I'd say it's actually pretty decent to good here. It isn't the most challenging. The AI aren't crazy perceptive to you, and the stakes aren't all that high, not to the point like they would get in the Arkham games where they could just completely destroy Batman, but I still think the stealth was fun. It is satisfying, and clearing out a room completely stealthily, yeah, I actually really did enjoy it. And the stealth was way better than, say, Amazing Spider-Man 2, where it just felt like a joke. And just a few seconds ago I mentioned Miles' abilities. He does have some unique abilities that Peter does not have, including these electricity powers, and I really enjoy these because it not only gives Miles some more personality, but it gives him new things to do and really does separate him from controlling like Peter. And they further explore that in Spider-Man 2, but it's cool here that he is different from Peter. Another thing that is different from Peter is the side missions in this game. There's not a ton of side content in this game, but it is somewhat different from the 2018 game, with Miles doing like these training programs, helping out Feast, and even some underground bases. And it's not crazy different from the 2018 game, but it's nice that they didn't just reuse, recycle, and copy what was in that game like they did with most of the map. There's some new areas here, but it isn't a totally new map, which I'm fine with. I mean, New York is huge. The map is relatively large and decently detailed. I really wasn't tripping over this. I've been playing the Yakuza series forever, and they've had the same map for like 10 games now. Now, when it comes to the story missions themselves, they usually involve you helping people, defeating bad guys, being stealthy, saving someone, chase sequences, and bosses. When it comes to the set pieces in Miles Morales, I think they are pretty good for the most part. Sometimes they're even better than the first games. I think they're all relatively well done, and the highlight is definitely the bosses. The bosses are actually pretty great here. Not only are they actually really built up in the story, especially with the villains getting so much backstory, but the boss fights themselves are pretty epic. I actually really do like them. And I'd say some of the best set pieces and boss fights of any Spider-Man game are right here in Miles Morales, especially the ending, which is actually really powerful. Something else that's really good is something that returns from the 2018 game, which is the way that they handle leveling up your character, gear, and the suits. It's basically just ripped right over, at least for the most part, but I like how the skills and leveling up and the gadgets and the suits work. Your Venom powers get even stronger, the regen rate gets better, there's a ton of cool suits here, including the Spider-Verse suit, which is just really awesome. It looks really great. And the gadgets are cool too, especially because so many of them are new. So I've talked a lot of good about Miles Morales, but why isn't this game better than the 2018 game? It seems better in a lot of aspects, and it is better in a lot of aspects, but one area that it's not is the length. This game is significantly shorter than the 2018 game, and if you stick to just the main missions, you could probably finish it in 4 or 5 hours. You do everything this game has to offer in maybe 9 or 10 hours. They do have a new game plus mode, but I've never been too interested in that in games. But yeah, the game is short. It could totally use more content. The game was released at $50 as opposed to the $60 the PS4 game was released at, but the game really just left me wanting more, which isn't the worst complaint, but just know you're not going to get a long runtime with this one. But the game is arguably better than the 2018 game in a ton of aspects. The story, the combat, the web slinging, Miles himself versus Peter, like there's a lot of great aspects with this game, and I think despite the short runtime, the game is not worth missing. Like, if you like the 2018 game or you like Spider-Man, this game is totally worth playing, especially if you're going to go into Spider-Man 2. I really advise that you play Miles Morales. You know, it's a lot cheaper. It's on PlayStation Plus. It's not going to take a ton of time. You're not going to be there for a couple weeks. You could totally beat it in a day or a weekend. It looks great, it plays great, it's got a great story to it. If you like Spider-Man in any sense, just go check it out. And so here we have Astro's Playroom. This is the pack-in game. I'm pretty sure every PS5 has this game installed, and I'll just immediately say, I believe everyone should play this game first. The moment you get your PS5, the first game you really should play is Astro's Playroom. It's the pack-in game for a reason. Like Wii Sports, that's a good pack-in game, but Astro's Playroom is something else. This is like the best pack-in game I've ever played. It's actually a really solid 3D platformer, and I would rather low-key, high-key play this game more than Sackboy Big Adventure, and I think it's a better 3D platformer. The game doesn't have a real story or plot to it. You just play as Astrobot and go through some areas and really explore PlayStation's history, and the game really shows off what the PS5, especially the controller, can do. But damn it, I love this game's presentation and aesthetic. I mean, presentation-wise, the game looks fantastic. Everything from the environments to the character models to the animation, it is spectacular. The aesthetic is really great as well, and there's just so much fan service to PlayStation games over the years. They reference tons of PS1 games, a bunch of PS2 references. You climb on the towers of the PS2 startup screen, plenty of PS3 references, even some PS4 game references. Call it nostalgia bait, but it all really hit for me. I loved it. I really just could not wait to see what I was going to see next. A bunch of old franchises like Jumping Flash that haven't been referenced in like 20 plus years actually showed up here. Oh, I loved it. And the aesthetics really just were on point. This is a really colorful, pretty game that is just a joy to play through. When it comes to the actual gameplay, it's not the most complex 3D platformer. Astrobot's moveset really isn't all that complex. The level design doesn't do anything crazy either, but they still managed to cram a ton of variety and make all of the areas actually feel different from each other. One way they're able to make everything feel different is these vehicles you get in as Astrobot that actually all control very differently. They all really utilize the PS5's controller and actually really show how the controller can be used in a bunch of ways that have never been used again, but it is still really cool to see, and it makes all of the areas really do feel unique from each other. I just thought the pacing, the variety, and how it was just constantly introducing new things, like it made this game incredibly entertaining and just a joy to play through. It's not that long of a game, taking maybe 3 or 4 hours. If you want to go back and collect everything and get the platinum, it's maybe 5 hours, but seriously, it was so entertaining. I really didn't want it to end. I just wanted to see what would come up next, what would they reference next, what kind of interesting gimmick would show up next, and then it ends. My biggest issue with the game is definitely that it's pretty short. I mean, I know it's a packing game, but it really left me wanting more. I hope in the future we can get a sequel to this game. I really doubt it, but man, this shit was so cool. I absolutely think everybody should try this game. You really have no reason to not try it. You have Uno on your Xbox and you have Astro's Playroom on your PS5. Go play this game. It is totally worth your time. You can finish it in an afternoon. Even if you don't like platformers, I still think this game is very much worth playing. It was just a joy. The entire time was just incredibly joyful. Alright, and here's the third PS5 launch title, and that is the Demon's Souls remake that came out in 2020. This was developed by Bluepoint Games and is a remake of the PS3 game by From Software. Now, while I never played the original, I'm very familiar with all the Souls games. I've played all the Dark Souls all the way up to Elden Ring. I've actually ranked them all. I really do love that series, so it was really cool to finally get to play Demon's Souls after all these years, and yeah, it's definitely a step back from Dark Souls. and it has certainly aged and it has a bit of clunkiness to it, but I still think it is a good game. Visually, the game looks fantastic. This is the best looking Souls game. Like, this game just looks phenomenal. The environments look amazing, the frame rate is super smooth, the character models look great, the visuals are just excellent. I know some people really do prefer how the PS3 game looks and don't like that the aesthetic was kind of changed, but man, this game just looks so good that I'm not even really tripping. When it comes to the gameplay, it really is a Souls game, an action RPG with relatively slow, methodical combat, and if you die, you will have to go get your souls back or you risk losing all of them. Demon Souls, though, is a bit different from all the other Souls games, especially when it comes to its structure. This game is very level focused. After you beat the first area, you can go to any of the 5 areas and start the levels, and each level is incredibly linear. This game is very linear. There's no open world to explore or anything like that, but it is cool that you get to actually choose which level you want to go to next. Some levels are clearly harder than others, but the choice is yours and yours alone. And speaking of hard, yeah, this is a difficult game. It absolutely has that Souls difficulty. Not only do the enemies hit like a truck, your max health goes down. When you aren't a human, the bosses are rather tricky, and there are some difficult areas you'll go through this game. Particularly anything with the Cthulhu motherfuckers or the swamp, those areas can just eat my ass. And speaking of, actually I'm gonna retract that statement. I'm just gonna say that some of the levels in this game are not that great. I love the level design of like Dark Souls, all of them, and especially Bloodborne, but Demon Souls, yeah, I'll be real, some of the levels just aren't all that great. They just really aren't all that fun to explore or go through, and there's just some really cheap areas. Like, there's no really bad areas. There's no Blight Town here, but I didn't like some of the areas in this game. But hey, I'm not going to act like I disliked all of them. There were plenty of areas that I actually did enjoy. It's just worth noting I didn't think it was all gold here. Speaking of not all gold, we have the combat. You'll be in combat most of the time you're playing this game, and as someone who played this game after Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, and Sekiro, yeah, we've really come a long way. It took me quite a while to get used to the combat in this game. It is a lot slower than even Dark Souls 1. It's clunkier, the movement is heavier, and at times it feels like it's even more punishing if you like run out of stamina. The combat is still good in this game. It absolutely is, and it still has depth. It's not some stupid button masher. It's actually far from it. It's just, I think every Souls game after this, so you know, Dark Souls and on, has better combat than this original game. And if you've only played the later games, well, the first few hours you're probably just gonna die a bunch like I did. But eventually things really did click for me, and I really did enjoy the combat at the end of the day. It is quite different actually from Dark Souls, and at times it certainly feels more archaic and the magic system is odd, but I really did enjoy the combat, especially against some of these bosses. Some of the bosses are actually pretty awesome in Demon Souls, some of them. I'll be the first to admit that some of the bosses absolutely suck in this game. They're much more of like a puzzle or a gimmick, or some people call a spectacle fight, where you don't really fight them, you just figure out some immediate weakness and kill them in like one move, or they're just trying to make a spectacle. And yeah, it's a bit disappointing because I'm like, man, I actually wanted to fight that. I didn't want what is basically just a cutscene where I kill it in like one shot. But the bosses you actually do get to fight that are more traditional, or more what you'd expect from Dark Souls, I think are actually good and really where the combat shines. Something else that shines is the fact that the online is still actually active. I can tell you from personal experience that yes, there are still people playing this game, there are still people invading, and you can still summon help as well. The game still goes online, and that's great. Overall, I enjoyed my time with Demon Souls. I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would. It is rough around the edges. I think that's like the best way to describe this game, is rough around the edges. If you've played the much more refined Souls games, it'll feel like a step back in other ways, but at the same time, a small step back from Dark Souls is still a pretty damn good game. I mean, Dark Souls is phenomenal. This game, while I don't think it's phenomenal, I still think it is good. If you like the genre and you haven't played it yet, I totally think it's worth playing. It's on PS Plus, it is pretty cheap. For some reason, they just do not want to bring it to Steam. Hopefully that changes one day. And while I don't think it's the best Souls game ever, in fact, I'd actually say this is the weakest of all of the Souls games, I still think it is very much worth your time. And I think that this is a really great remake that is worth a playthrough. And so here we have Gran Turismo 7, which came out in 2022. Now, Gran Turismo is obviously a very long-standing PlayStation series. It started all the way back on the PS1, and it's good to see that it's even here on the PS5 as well. And it's even better to see that the newest game is actually pretty good. The last few Gran Turismos, I don't know, they just haven't hit the same like some of those older ones, like Gran Turismo 3 and 4. Those ones felt like they just hit different, but 7 is actually a pretty good game. Now, with this game being a driving simulator, I think the first thing we should talk about is the driving, the controls, and the handling itself. I personally think that it is an absolute dream. You can really customize the handling and the controls in this game to such an absurd degree, like very few games let you customize it this much. You can make GT7 one of the most realistic, challenging racing simulations around. You can turn off all the driving assists, you can make it more real than even real life it seems, and you can also do the opposite. You can turn on all the auto assists, you can make it a pretty casual racing experience. I usually fall somewhere in the middle, and I just really love that level of customization. It's like they really want everybody to try this game and they want everybody to get into it. You know, you might start out pretty casual, but as you play more and more, you might go for the more hardcore sim elements, and I think it's just really great in that sense. I think the cars control really well, the controls are just excellent, and I have zero issues when it comes to the feel, the handling, controls, etc. Something else that really matters with the Gran Turismo games is the car selection. I think the car selection is pretty awesome. I mean, relative to the other Gran Turismo games, I think the car selection is very good. There are tons upon tons and tons of cars, a ridiculous amount of cars. Not many games have this many cars in it, and not many games have this many cars this detailed as well. The presentation, oh, it is so good. The cars look amazing. The environments look really nice, but man, these cars, like, these are some of the best looking cars of any video game. It really just looks fantastic. A lot of the games on this list look excellent. This game definitely is the best looking cars though. Alright, so the driving's great, the controls are solid, the presentation's excellent, and the car selection is pretty good. So what else is there even to talk about this game? I don't know, maybe what you're doing in the game. You're dropped into this really slick menu and you have a few options. You know, you can just do some regular races, you can race against people online, or you can do the game's career mode where you're kind of given these like little challenges, these little books where you get to learn about cars and car history, and you get to try a variety of different cars and do these challenges. There's also where you get your driver's license like the other Gran Turismo games, and there's even a few neat little music challenges that provide a nice distraction. I'm not going to act like there's the most game modes or a ton of variety with the gameplay. I mean, it really is just racing, hardcore racing for hours and hours and hours, but I think what's on offer here is still pretty enjoyable nonetheless. I'm not the most hardcore realistic racing game simulator guy, and I can't get into the really nitty-gritty details with this game like plenty of other people who only play games like this can. I'm a pretty casual Gran Turismo player. I enjoy the old games. I enjoy this new game. There's a ton of awesome cars. Even a fucking Tesla shows up here. I like how the cars handle. They actually do feel different from each other. You go through a bunch of awesome tracks. I mean, yeah, we've been driving on some of these tracks for like 20 years now, but that's what happens when we get tracks based off of real life. I think the tracks are awesome. I generally do like the campaign mode. I will concede and say that it does get a bit stale by the end of it, and I was kind of waiting for things to just wrap up, but for the most part I do like the campaign, and the multiplayer does seem decent enough. Again, I can't get into the weeds here, I can't get crazy nitty gritty, I can't tell you about every single feature or maybe what's missing from older games or how it really stacks up compared to Forza beyond a relatively casual view, but there are still a few things that I have some issues with. The game's microtransactions and just in-game economy is all over the place. I really don't like this. Getting the supercars takes way too long. You can't sell cars, which is certainly an odd choice. Like I mentioned, the campaign does start to get stale by the end of it. I didn't feel that with the older Gran Turismo games, which were longer by the way, and at times it kind of feels like the older Gran Turismos had more content to them. Maybe that's just me though. Another thing that really disappointed me actually was the music. The music in Gran Turismo 7 was just relatively forgettable. All the other Gran Turismo games have fantastic, like excellent music. I use it in my videos all the time, but Gran Turismo 7, man, I couldn't tell you like anything from this game. That was like the most disappointing thing for me, is that the music was just not very good. But aside from all that, I still think Gran Turismo 7 is a very enjoyable game. It's definitely one of the best modern racing games around. Is it better than Forza? I don't know, you tell me. I enjoy both of them about the same. If you like driving games, if you're looking for a racing sim, this is absolutely one to get. If you're not really into driving games, you know, this game, it could be the one to win you over, thanks to just how accessible it is. There are definitely some issues here, and the microtransactions are pretty evil, it feels like, but I still think there's a pretty good game under the hood here. Pun intended.
To shut the fuck up.
And here we have Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which came out in 2021. So this is the latest Ratchet & Clank game. It's pretty sad to see, but Ratchet & Clank and God of War are really the only two PlayStation franchises that are still around from the PS2 days, much to the sadness of the Jak and Daxter and Sly Cooper fans, but I'm just happy we got anything. So Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart does take place after the PS3 games, but it's pretty standalone. You really don't need to have played legit any other Ratchet & Clank game to understand this game's story. There are plenty of nods and references to other Ratchet & Clank games that longtime fans will like, but if you've never played one, you'll have no problem understanding this story. It sees Ratchet & Clank at a parade where Clank reveals to Ratchet he actually recreated the Dimensionator from one of the earlier games, but the evil Dr. Nefarious shows up, steals it, and starts causing havoc across the dimensions, including another dimension, where Dr. Nefarious isn't a total dumbass and Ratchet & Clank aren't there to stop him. Instead, there's another Lombax named Rivet. She's the other main character here, and it's up to all of them to defeat Dr. Nefarious, but now in multiple dimensions. I think the story's good in this game. I'm not going to act like it's the best story Ratchet & Clank's ever had, because it's not. I think the PS2 and PS3 games have better stories, but at the very least I really do like Rivet. I think she's a great character. She's actually decently well written and is given a lot of time to develop and actually has some depth. I think her and Kit are actually pretty good. Outside of that, the writing, yeah, it's alright. You know, at times it definitely feels like Saturday morning cartoon. It's a little predictable. It's rather lighthearted, and I don't think it's one of those plots or storylines that's really going to stick with you even a few months after you play through the game. Like, it's fun in the moment, but I don't think it has a ton of staying power outside of some key moments with Rivet. Rivet really is my favorite part of the entire story here. When it comes to the gameplay, it very much is that Ratchet & Clank gameplay. Ratchet & Clank has been very similar really since like the original game, and is the definition of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, if you've played one Ratchet & Clank game, you'll understand how all of them play and how all of them control. And when it comes to the controls, I think it's actually some of the best the series has ever had. It's super smooth, it's tight, and overall it just feels nice. Rivet does not control any differently from Ratchet. She feels exactly the same, and I mean, that's fine. It's all good there. Now, the first thing to really bring up for the gameplay is this game's big gimmick, that is the rift tethers, where you're able to jump between different dimensions. This is really the thing that sets this game apart from all of the other Ratchet & Clank games, and it's where the most originality and creativity really come into play here. As you do jump between different dimensions, you have special moves that actually correlate with those dimensions, and the platforming in general, yeah, I think it's pretty good. I would not say it's the very best level design the series has ever seen, but I think it's some of the better level design that this franchise has. And when you're not platforming, you're getting into combat, and the combat in this game is just as good as it's been really in all the other Ratchet & Clank games. You have a bunch of different weapons to use here, and while they aren't the most original and it kind of feels like they low-key have been using the same 8 weapons for every single game, there are still some original weapons here, and it is still fun to blow shit up. That's the most important thing at the end of the day. It's still fun to destroy everything, and it is rather satisfying. You upgrade the weapons. With a fun upgrade screen and some collectibles you find along the way, you'll travel through plenty of different varied environments and do plenty of different things. I'll say when it comes to the presentation, this game looks fantastic. The environments look great, the models are good, the presentation is just really well done, but I like how many different areas you go to in this game. You aren't just stuck on like 2 or 3 planets the entire time, and it really does feel like you're doing something different for every single level. I really enjoy the big open levels the most, where you actually do have side quests and you can explore around. I thought these were actually quite fun, rather memorable. Not every gameplay style is great. Like every other Ratchet & Clank game, there are several instances where you aren't just platforming or blowing stuff up. You're either in a vehicle or doing some kind of mini game. Here, the flying mini game, yeah, this just ain't it, but most of the mini games and other gameplay styles are actually good. And I would take all of these vehicle sections, all of these mini games over any of the stupid little puzzle mini games that the Spider-Man games have. Seriously, Insomniac knows we don't like them, but for whatever reason, they just keep putting them in. Like, I can personally tell you, they know most people don't like them, but you know what, that's conversation for a different day. They even have Clank sections where he's like a time god and he gets to clone himself, and this was fine. I don't really have much to say about it. I like the variety this game has. I think it's able to keep things interesting and engaging the entire time. It doesn't have the longest runtime, around 6 to 8 hours. If you want to do everything, maybe like 10 or 11 hours. I really do recommend doing everything. I feel like you'll get the most out of the game if you do that, and it is actually fun, somewhat meaningful side content. It's not just useless filler thrown in there to add extra playtime. But to wrap things up on Rift Apart, if you like the Ratchet and Clank games, if you like 3D platformers, I think you're going to like this game. If you're pretty tired of the Ratchet and Clank series, I don't think this game's going to win you over, but if you've taken a break, maybe haven't played one in a few years, or you really do love this series, I think you're going to enjoy the game. The game is also available on PC, which I think is actually really cool. And so here we have the latest game on the list, Stellar Blade, releasing here in 2024. Stellar Blade has been making a bunch of headlines for reasons I honestly don't give a shit about. I'm here to just talk about the game. So Stellar Blade has a pretty interesting premise. At some point in human history, these monsters known as Natibas show up, and we actually, as humans, get into a war with them and lose. And so we get booted into space, basically, and this game is about reclaiming the Earth. And that's all I'm really going to say for the story, is this is a pretty new game, and I don't want to spoil anything. The premise is relatively interesting. It very much gives off Nier Automatopoeia vibes, but that is where the Nier comparisons end. While I think the premise and the world are decently interesting, I don't think the story's all that great in this game, especially not the first half. This is one of those games where like everything happens towards the end of the game, and it kind of feels like the first 75% of the game is building up towards this last part. But even with all that, I think the story is just okay. I didn't think the writing or the dialogue was particularly very good. I don't think any of the characters are really all that great outside of Eve. And I wouldn't even say Eve is amazing either. Obviously, she's very visually stunning and iconic, but she's not one of the greatest main characters ever. She's no 2B, I'll say that. But at least she was relatively likable. I think the story's alright. I did still really want to see what was going to happen, and I was interested. It's not like I totally didn't care like Rise of Ronin. It's just, I feel like this could have been a lot more. But I could be here for 20 minutes talking about the story, characters, world, all that. Let's move on to the gameplay. When it comes to the core gameplay of Stellar Blade, it's kind of a hodgepodge of like hack and slash games, character action games. There's some Souls-like elements in there.
You just posted cringe. You're going to lose. Subscribe.
Okay, I'm not saying it's like Dark Souls or it's the Dark Souls of sexy robot games or anything like that. It just has a few elements that are Souls-like. A majority of the game is combat, and I think the combat is good. It definitely plays more like a hack and slash than a Souls-like. You aren't doing a few slow, methodical moves here and dodging all over the place. You are dodging all over the place, but it definitely more is like an aggressive hack and slash where you're just wailing away at these enemies. You can do two basic attacks. You can string them together for a bunch of different combos. You can hold down L1 and R1 and do some more powerful attacks. These use up your gauges. To get more gauges, you want to dodge enemy attacks or parry. Parrying is a huge part of this game. You'll want to parry a bunch of moves. Plenty of moves can be parried. Not everything can be parried. You will have to dodge some stuff, and the parry feels really good in this game. It kind of even feels better than Rise of the Ronin. Like, this shit feels good. It's incredibly satisfying to parry something. Like the parrying, that really is some good shit. The combat in general is some good shit. It really promotes aggressive play. It's very fast. I like how rewarding it is. It's incredibly satisfying to do well and then be rewarded with more energy, so you can do big moves like where you pierce their armor, or you actually can stop their combo. You can straight do a combo breaker out of Killer Instinct with one of her moves, and it feels really great. The combat, it feels nice, it controls well, and it's really just got a great flow and pace to it. The haptic feedback actually does add to the combat, and it just makes it feel all the much better. Again, the parry really is the best part here. The combat in general really actually does feel quite refined, and it feels like this is where the most effort was put in, and I think the combat's great. A majority of the game is the combat, so I'm glad that it is good. When you're not in the combat, there's a few things you'll be doing. The game does have some platforming, some minor puzzle solving, and a little bit of exploration even. The structure of this game is a little odd. It's not super linear, but it's not an open world either. It's got a few open areas you can explore, and there's even side quests, but a majority of the game is rather linear. And that's fine with me. I don't need every game to have some big open world or be super linear. This kind of mix between them, yeah, it was all good with me. I think the structure and the pacing of this game is actually pretty good. You go to different environments pretty frequently. Outside of going to the sewers twice in the first like 10 hours of the game, that was a bit overkill, but outside of that, you go to some varied environments and actually have relatively varied objectives for the most part. There are plenty of side missions in this game, but the side missions, I just didn't think they were all that good. I did a bunch of them and was not really impressed. The bulletin board ones I think are just not good, but the other ones for like these characters were really just kind of plain. It was go get something from me and bring it back, and I'll give you like 45 seconds of exposition and some little reward, and you'll get a bunch of XP. And I just didn't find them all that fulfilling or really worth it, but there is a decent amount of side content here. There's even like a new game plus mode when you're done with it. The game has a decent length to it, taking around 20 to 30 hours. If you do all the side content, you can add a bit more. but I think it does have a relatively good length. I mentioned a second ago skills. Yeah, you do get XP and level up and you get skill points, and there's like trees on here and everything. This helps make the progression a bit better. You'll find yourself getting stronger and new moves, even if some of the moves you unlock should be stuff you just start with, like the ability to dodge twice. Come on now. But I thought the leveling up and skill system and even the general loot were decent enough here. It was certainly better than Rise of the Ronin, I will give it that. It felt a bit more personalized. Now, while there are plenty of things that I like about the gameplay, there were a few things I didn't really like here. I just am not a fan of the traversal, like the platforming when you're climbing stuff and the swimming. This just didn't feel very good. It wasn't really fun. It's not awful. I didn't hate everything when I was doing it and going, gosh, I wish I was doing something else other than this shitty platforming. It wasn't that bad. I just didn't think it was all that great. I also didn't think it was all that great to use the gun in this game. The gun is super slow and it just doesn't feel that good. And the last thing I'll mention for negatives is, well, I think the structure and the pacing of the game is quite good. The level design itself, it's nothing special. It's decent enough. I enjoyed it for what it was, but I'm not going to act like it was superb or really captivated me or gave me any aha or wow moments. I was just like, yeah, it's all right. Now, when it comes to this game's presentation, I am all over the place. Sometimes this game looks freaking incredible, and other times I just don't even know what to make of it. Like, the character models are all over the place. Eve obviously looks great, but then some of these other characters don't look like they belong in this game. It's like there's these two sexy anime ladies here, and then there's just this realistic man standing next to them, and I'm just like, huh? And then the environments, most of them look pretty good, but at times it looks rather inconsistent. Maybe I'm overanalyzing this, but at least the frame rate was pretty solid. The presentation I'd still say is decent enough, and the music is fantastic. The music is so good in this game, it's not even funny. I really enjoy the music here. They absolutely nailed that. In conclusion, Stellar Blade is a pretty good game. While it does have some flaws and it's not the most original, in fact at times it feels like the game is kind of lacking in identity, I still really did enjoy it. I think the combat is great, the pairing feels really great, I think the progression and pacing of the game is solid enough, it's got a good length, the visuals are fine enough, the sound is good, and the story, yeah, it's not great, but at least it's somewhat interesting. And at the end of all this, I can still give it my thumbs up and recommend the game. It's not the best character action game you'll play this year, but it's a pretty good game. And here we have Horizon Forbidden West, developed primarily by Guerrilla Games. It was released in 2022, and it is the sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn. This game really looks at Zero Dawn, and they asked, how can we improve really everything from that original game? And yeah, they did it. I really do think this game is just a straight improvement over Zero Dawn in virtually every single aspect. When it comes to the story, it takes place pretty much right after Zero Dawn, and it sees Aloy traveling across America to save the world. Obviously, there's a lot more going on here than that, but I don't really want to spoil anything because I actually think the story's pretty cool. It's a lot more sci-fi than the previous game, and I know some people don't like it. I know some people don't like Aloy or the characters or where the plot goes, but I actually really did enjoy it. I like the twists. I think Aloy's a good character, and I think the side characters are actually really well done as well. These aren't the greatest characters you'll find in an open world game, but I think they're decent enough, and even the characters that return from Zero Dawn are actually way better, Aloy herself included. And when it comes to the gameplay, it plays incredibly similar to Zero Dawn. It's a massive open world where you just have an absolute ton of things you can do. You can go on hunts, you can do the main missions, you can help out the characters, or you can just go off into a direction and go see what you find. You'll find plenty of things ready to kill you, crafting supplies, who knows, you might even find an NPC or two. This is a very vast vertical open world where you have a lot to see here. This is one of the bigger open worlds of the last few years, but I also think that it is one of the better open worlds. I think it's actually very well designed. I like how different all of the areas are from each other. No two areas feel the same. Again, it's very vertical, and they give you the tools for that verticality. It's not the most common when an open world is this vertical. Usually it's just long stretches of flat land, and this game has plenty of that as well, but the verticality really is appreciated. It mixes things up, it keeps things interesting and challenging because climbing stuff is actually, a big part of the gameplay here, figuring out how to get to the higher up places. And again, they give Aloy the tools for this verticality. She has plenty of new tools up her sleeve, one of which is a paraglider, which is very similar to a certain Zelda game. And while we're making comparisons, I'll just say that this open world is much more comparable to Breath of the Wild versus Zero Dawn's, which was more comparable to a Ubisoft game. I really can appreciate this game's level of freedom that they actually give you. They really will let you go explore pretty much everywhere on the map. And when it comes to the side content, for the most part, it's relatively meaningful. A bunch of the characters slickers of special side content that's actually good. There are the hunts, and most of it is relatively entertaining. Some of it, yeah, is that fetch quest cookie cutter typical open world junk, but a majority of the side content is not that. When it comes to the main missions, it's pretty much all good. They find a variety of different ways to make the main missions actually feel different from the rest of the gameplay, and they put you in some pretty unique combat scenarios. And speaking of the combat scenarios, this is where I think the game really improves over Horizon Zero Dawn. Like, the combat was good in that game, but this game really opens it up and expands on it. Like, all of the enemies from the first game return, but there's a bunch of new enemies with different strategies, moves, attacks, ways to take them out, etc. And Aloy is just as mobile as ever, and the combat really does get frantic. It is some of the best open world combat you will find in any video game. I think the most comparable is low-key Monster Hunter, but sometimes it gets even crazier than Monster Hunter. You're just fighting these giant machines that can take you out like that. Like, oftentimes, especially at the beginning, these creatures are way bigger, way stronger than Aloy, and they can almost one-shot you, so you really gotta take this shit seriously. You gotta scrounge around, and the stakes can be rather high, and it makes it actually really exciting. You have a bunch of different tools, obviously a bunch return from Zero Dawn, but you have a bunch of new ones. There's a bunch of status elements, and there's different ways to take out really every monster. There's different strategies, weak points, etc., and it's just so engaging. It really never gets old. No two combat scenarios are the same. There's just so many different ways to go about literally every single encounter, and the AI is actually pretty decent. They'll mix their tactics up depending on what's going on, and it's just really well done. The combat is like my favorite part of this game. My least favorite part of this game has to be anything to do with the crafting or the game's economy. Man, I didn't like the crafting in Zero Dawn. It returns here, and it's just as annoying. I don't find this fun. Walking around picking up sticks and rocks and shit just isn't fun, and then you can craft arrows and other materials, and I don't know, I didn't really enjoy this. And the game's economy is very similar to Far Cry, where if you want to get an upgrade, usually a pretty good upgrade, you're going to need like a very specific item or animal material, and then you have to go spend 5 to 10 to 20 minutes to go hunt it down, and I just didn't find this all that fun. I've never loved it in Far Cry either, and I'm just like, can we get past all this crafting shit, man? There's just so many other better ways to do this. I don't like the crafting stuff. That's easily my biggest issue with this entire game. Other than that, yeah, I think it's actually pretty great. The open world's great. The combat is excellent. The presentation, I mean, I don't really need to say anything here. You know the presentation is fantastic. It certainly is a looker. I don't know how graphics really get much better than this for video games, but you know, that's probably what they said in the N64 days, so we'll find a way to do it. The game has a bunch of memorable moments. It has some awesome set pieces. The story, I think, is actually good. Aloy's cool, and the world is rather interesting. If you haven't played this game and you like open world games, I really think this is one to check out. If you liked Zero Dawn at all, I think it's one to check out. It just recently came to PC as well, and this game seems to be allergic to releasing at a good time. Really, this entire series is just bad timing. The series, or Zero Dawn, was by Breath of the Wild, and then Forbidden West was by Elden Ring, and both PC ports have had other big games come out at the same time. This game keeps getting shafted, but I am here to say that I think Forbidden West is pretty good, and it's totally Guerrilla's best game, in my opinion. I've always loved Horizon way more than Killzone. This is my favorite game from them. And here we have Helldivers 2, which released here in 2024. This game was developed by Arrowhead Game Studios, and while they aren't a first-party Sony developer, this still very much is a modern Sony game, and it's one of the best. It's easily the best multiplayer game SIE has put out in years, and it's one of the best live service games around. Now, to give a little context, I don't play that many multiplayer games, let alone live service games. I got just way too many single player games to play, especially with y'all requesting so many games. Like, I don't play a ton of multiplayer games. But this game, oh, I've actually played a good amount of Helldivers 2. Helldivers 2 is like the only live service game I've ever really gotten into outside of Fortnite. At least based off the first few months, this is how you do a live service game. But something that made Helldivers 2 stand out from all of the other live service games is that it actually launched in a good state with a good amount of content. Most live service games, they have tons of issues, they barely have any content, you just gotta wait, and then like a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line, you know, it's got a ton of shit. No, Helldivers 2 launched actually with a good amount of content, and it wasn't buggy as shit or broken as all hell. No, it was a very polished product. When it comes to Helldivers 2's plot or premise or setup, it really is about Super Earth trying to maintain democracy and freedom. And in order to protect freedom, they're going to have to kill a lot of bugs and robots. The game does have some environmental storytelling, but for the most part, there isn't really much of a plot here. More so just a premise, but something this game absolutely has is a personality. People love the personality of this game, myself included. It's pretty goofy, it feels very much like Starship Troopers, and it's about as cheesy as that. It doesn't go as crazy as like Earth Defense Force, but I still like this game's attitude, and it's a breath of fresh air, honestly. With so many serious games, especially on this list, it's nice to see a game that doesn't take itself crazy serious. So when it comes to how this game plays, Helldivers 2 isn't actually all that different from the original game. You're dropped into these rather open environments and are told to just annihilate all the opposition, anyone who stands in the way of freedom, and to do some pretty basic objectives. And so you'll be killing a lot of shit and doing a lot of fighting game like inputs to drop stratagems. Whether you're dropping a missile, you're getting a new weapon, or a supply pack, you'll be doing plenty of these fighting game like inputs, and I've always had fun entering these. The biggest difference between Helldivers 1 and 2 is actually just the camera perspective. The first game was a top-down shooter, here it's a third-person shooter. You can even go first-person when you're zooming in, and I will just say the shooting feels so good in this game. It feels very different from like any other shooter. It's just kind of hard to describe. It feels like there's a lot of weight and impact with every single shot. The weapons feel great, they're incredibly satisfying. All of them feel very different, and you'll want to try every single one. And when you're shooting the enemies, ooh, it is so satisfying. Chunks of these bugs and robots will be flying off. You will be blowing shit up. Like, it just feels incredibly satisfying. The shooting is just superb in this game. It was good and visceral in the first one, but this one, man, it is so good. The shooting is hands down some of the best shooting in any modern game. Like, it just feels so good. I love the weight of all the weapons. Another key component of Helldivers 2 is the multiplayer aspect. This game is meant to be played in co-op. It's best in co-op. Friendly fire is always on. It leads to some hilarious things, like getting dropped on by your teammates. There's no PvP here. They do not plan on adding PvP, and man, when it comes to co-op shooters, it doesn't get much better than Helldivers 2. I've had so much fun with this game, as have many others, whether it was before the game came out and after. Like, the multiplayer side of things is just great. It's really one of the things that makes Helldivers 2 as good as it is. The objectives aren't anything too complex here. It'll be like clear out all of the enemies of an area, take out the nest, blow something up, activate something, move something somewhere else. It's nothing too crazy, but I still like it. And the game has so many other random factors always happening that none of the objectives feel exactly the same. Every single time you drop down into an environment, even if it's the exact same environment, things are just not going to be the same. And that's what keeps the gameplay so engaging, so interesting. And then there's tons of difficulty levels and some of the best progression you'll find legit in any live service game. It feels like they're just constantly rewarding you with stuff. The battle pass is actually very generous. You can get a ton of amazing stuff from it, whether it's the sentry, shields, missiles, new weapons. There's a bunch to unlock here, and it'll really lead you to come back for more and more. As long as you got people who want to play, you're going to be on Helldivers 2 probably a long time. It's been months now, and I still know plenty of people that have actually really stuck with it. Part of me was worried this would be one of those flash in the pan kind of games. You know, the ones where it's a popular multiplayer shooter for like a month or two and then it just kind of dies out. But Helldivers 2 really seems like it actually has some staying power, which is pretty incredible, and the game's community is just fantastic. Like, this game really does emphasize teamwork over everything else, and all of this leads to some of the most chaotic fun I've ever had with a multiplayer game. Like, this game is just fun, pure and simple. It really is as simple as that. Like, the more you play, the crazier this shit gets too. You start getting bigger and better weapons. You start being able to drop just missiles all over the place. Enemies swarm all over. You get to the higher difficulties. Like, this shit gets crazy, but oh, it is so much fun. And oftentimes the crazier the better. I know my footage might not exactly share that, since most of it was when I first started playing the game. But this, coupled with the game's attitude, and you just have a really bang-up game here. And a few months later, they're still updating it like crazy. The game still seems really popular. The game runs really well. It's super smooth. There was a ton of server issues, like a ton of server issues at launch, but a few months later now, things seem to be better. And at this point, I can absolutely say this game is worth playing. There aren't many better modern co-op games, and I'm not just saying this because I was part of the game's production. I really do think it is a good-ass game. And a lot of live service games could take some serious notes because this is absolutely how you do it. At least the first few months anyway, this is how it's done. And here we have Marvel's Spider-Man 2, which came out in 2023, developed by Insomniac Games and yours truly. I've talked about this game ad nauseum, not only in my personal and professional life, but on the channel as well, so I will try to keep things pretty brief here. When it comes to Marvel's Spider-Man 2, this is, in my opinion, the best superhero game since Arkham City, and it's a really solid contender for being the greatest superhero game of them all. The game takes place after Miles Morales, and it sees Peter and Miles teaming up to take on an even greater threat, and that's all I'm really going to say about the story. While I know not everybody loves the story, I really enjoy the story of Marvel's Spider-Man 2. I think they really, for the most part, hit it out of the park with some really likable, excellent main characters, even better villains, like just really fleshed out, interesting antagonists, on top of some of the best world building any superhero game has ever had. I think the writing is pretty good, the characters are good, and I like where the story goes. Sue me. And when it comes to how the game plays, it's more Spider-Man. It plays very similar to the previous two Insomniac games, but it's even better. You can freely switch between Peter and Miles, and both of them have different moves and different traversal. And one thing I think even the game's harshest critics can agree is that the traversal mechanics are fantastic in this game. The web slinging is so good. It is unbelievably good. Being able to glide and fly around is also really great. Like, the traversal is so good. You'll never fast travel anywhere because it's so much fun to go all over the place. And this map is really well designed for it. Most of the map is reused from the previous games, but it's New York. Would you really expect it to actually be different? I don't really care that it's the same map. It's really lived in and detailed, and it always feels like it's so alive. It's a pretty great open world, and what are you going to do in it? You're going to fight a bunch of crime. You can go stop random thugs and crimes. You can do some of the main missions, some of the side content. There's some collectibles. It's a pretty big open world. There is a decent amount of freedom, and almost all of it is meaningful for the most part. I'm not going to act like this game reinvents the wheel on Spider-Man games. That wheel was developed 20 plus years ago, but it certainly refines it to a certain degree we've never seen before. This is the best gameplay loop that a Spider-Man game has ever had, and it's just so much fun. When it comes to the combat, it's definitely the best combat of any Spider-Man game. There's actually a decent amount of depth here. Miles and Peter have a bunch of different moves that are unique to them. They can even combine attacks. Like, it's actually pretty good when it comes to the combat. Sure, it's not the most challenging combat in the world, but I actually think the combat is quite good, and I like all of the gadgets. I like how many new ones are here as well. And it really just feels like a straight improvement on everything we got before, including the visuals. The game looks fantastic. Puddlegate is no more. Those puddles be looking good. Those reflections are nice, the animation is great, the presentation in general is just top notch. This game really is the complete package. If you like Spider-Man and haven't checked this game out, I really don't know what you're waiting for. It is still only on PS5, but I am sure it will come to PC at some point. And I think even if you weren't all that big on the first game, you might still like this one. Again, it doesn't reinvent the wheel for AAA games, Spider-Man games, or open world games, but man, it is a really fun, refined time. And so here we have Returnal, which came out in 2021. This game was developed by Housemarque, and shortly after SIE actually purchased the studio, making it, I guess, a first-party game. Returnal is maybe the most different game on this entire list, and it still amazes me that SIE actually greenlit this and put it out. It seems very different from what most modern Sony games are. As someone with literal first-hand experience, you know, they want the lowest common denominator. They want games for everybody where they can get everyone through the door, make as many sales as possible, and Returnal is not that. Returnal is an uncompromised, actually pretty hardcore experience that is definitely not for everybody. I am sure there is a decent subset of people who tried this game and bounced off it immediately, thinking it was either too difficult or just too out there compared to all the other Sony games. It is very unique and quite different from any other game on this list, but it's also one of the best games on this list. I recently finished it, and man, I really like this game. While I didn't love it at first, it really grew on me, and it's one of my favorite PS5 games. The game follows this woman named Celine, an astronaut who lands on this planet in search of this mysterious like white shadow signal or something, but she finds herself stuck in a time loop, and so she's just trying to get the hell off this planet. And the story in this game, ooh, it is actually way better than you might expect, and it's way better than it initially lets on. It's a very good story. Celine is a really interesting character, and I really enjoyed what this game was putting down. There's also a lot of symbolism, and I really thought it was just a very well done story. It's not perfect, but I liked it for what it was. When it comes to the gameplay, this is really where things vary. So it is a third-person shooter, but it's actually like a very fast-paced, roguelike bullet hell third-person shooter. Yeah, it's kind of a mashup of genres, and I'll just immediately say there is no game that plays anything like Returnal. This game is incredibly fast, you can boost all over the place, you can jump pretty far, you move at a good speed, and enemies usually bombard you with projectiles, and at times it'll be hard to see anything. There's so many projectiles. It really does get to like bullet hell levels of dodging. And on top of all of this, it still is a third-person shooter, a very good third-person shooter, I might add. The shooting feels great, all the weapons feel different and nice from each other. There is a Gears of War style reload function, and even a charged up alternate fire for every single weapon. The shooting is great in this game. The combat, it's fast, it's visceral, it can be very punishing, and it will absolutely keep you on your toes. From hour 1 to hour like 30 or 40 or however long it takes you to beat this game, it never lets its guard down, and it's just kind of relentless. And the runs you'll be doing actually get to be pretty long. I mentioned this was a roguelike. A huge part of the game is dying and trying over and over. All of the levels are randomly generated. Really, it's a bunch of randomly generated rooms spliced together. And I know what your first thought is, oh, it's probably going to get repetitive, all the rooms are going to feel the same, and it's going to get old quickly. No, actually, Returnal has some of the best random generation I've ever seen in a game. Like, it's actually really well done. Sure, over time you'll notice a bunch of the rooms are very similar or borderline identical, but Returnal is a really great way of mixing it up, changing a bunch of different variables like where enemies are, where drops are. And it just doesn't ever feel like you're in the exact same room over and over. It doesn't feel like there's a template being placed down here. It always feels different. There's a bunch of different areas, and all of them are incredibly different from each other, and it just keeps things incredibly varied and fresh. Like, so many roguelikes just get kind of boring over time because you've seen all the layouts, you've seen all the templates, and it just doesn't really do enough to keep things interesting. Returnal is not one of those games. The random generation actually works in the game's favor. It keeps things interesting, and you'll want to explore like every room. The sense of exploration you get in this game is very good. The game really does reward you for it. It also rewards you for playing well. I mean, that might seem pretty obvious, but doing really well, not getting hit, you'll actually become even stronger and stronger, and that will reset once you take damage, but you can get some really good highs here. You can get the blood pumping, you actually can feel, you know, something. You can feel alive when you're playing this game, when you're in the heat of the moment, dodging everything. You got a 5 charge and you don't want to lose all your special abilities. You've got a bunch of good shit with you, and then you die and it's all over and you're like, fuck. And instead of playing something else, you just keep at it over and over because it's just that fun. It's low-key addicting. The game is very challenging. Like any other roguelike, you can just have a total shit run where you just don't get anything good, and yeah, it can really suck, but even if you get a good drop or several good drops, like, the game is still relatively difficult. The enemies can totally kick your ass, and some of the environments really aren't messing around. It's really great stuff, actually, when it comes to the difficulty. It's incredibly balanced, and when you're good, oh, you get real good at this game. They also keep all the runs interesting thanks to just how many different random factors there are, how many different power-ups there are, how you're constantly unlocking more and more. And I can confidently say no two runs are even ever close to each other thanks to just the random generation and how many just straight up random factors there are, and it makes the game incredibly replayable. I really didn't want to play like anything else when I was playing this game. I was just so focused on it, and I feel like that doesn't happen to me a ton, especially these days when I have like a bazillion new games to play, but Returnal was all I wanted to play because I was just having such a fun time with this game. It's also been updated over the last year or two. They added a co-op mode, which is actually pretty cool. They added this tower for even more challenges, and you'll just want to come back to this game because, again, it's just so much fun. It's so rewarding. I love how just different this game is from everything else. It feels so unique. It plays incredibly unique. The story's interesting. The presentation is fantastic. It looks great. All these environments look great. Selene is awesome. And all of this comes together to really be one of the best experiences you could get on a PS5. Like, I didn't realize how good it was until I really played it myself. I'd heard good things, but I was a bit skeptical. I was like, come on, a roguelike, is it really that good? No, this game is actually hella good. It doesn't have the greatest start, and it certainly can take an hour or two to really get accustomed to the game's systems, the flow, the progression, etc. But once it clicks with you, and it will click pretty fast, oh, it's so good. You won't want to play like anything else. It's difficult, but it's rewarding, and it is incredibly satisfying. This game, it's just a real adrenaline rush, and I just had a ton of fun with it. Again, it is very different from what SIE normally puts out, but I loved it, and I implore anyone to try it, especially if you like shooters and you're looking for something with a challenge. It is also available on Steam, so that is pretty cool. Alright, and here we have The Last of Us Part 1. This came out in 2022, and it is a remake of The Last of Us, the PS3 game, which also had a remastered version on PS4. And I'm sure plenty of people have already rolled their eyes just from the fact that I included this game, but like I said, remakes were fair game. Remasters and director's cuts, no Ghost of Tsushima, no Death Stranding, no Last of Us 2 remaster, but Last of Us Part 1, that is absolutely fair game. I mean, the game was basically already goated back in the PS3 days, but here it is again. This is definitely the best version to play the game, and it's The Last of Us. I'm not going to spend much time on this. It is a one-to-one remake of the original game. It low-key feels like a remaster of a remaster at times, and it's still just as great as ever. With one of the best stories of any video game, it has some of the best writing of any game. The characters are all excellent. Joel and Ellie's connection is just unbreakable. It really is just kind of goated at this point. It's so good. There's so many memorable parts. Like the story, world building, characters, writing, it's all just phenomenal. No other game has ever been able to hit like Last of Us 1 did. You know, Last of Us 2, it does a few things of its own, but Last of Us 1 really just hit different. It's phenomenal. The gameplay is still the same gameplay that you really liked back then. It feels a little updated, a little refined, but they really didn't need to change much since the original game and the PS4 game still feel really good even nowadays. The combat is still as visceral as ever. It's still quite good. The gunplay is decent. The melee system is relatively basic, but it gets the job done. The stealth, I could pretty much say the same thing. It is quite basic, but it's decent. The enemy AI is pretty good. They actually keep things interesting, and you go through a ton of different areas. Like, the game is actually incredibly varied with its locations, and it keeps things rolling. Like, after playing through so many modern games that feel like they take an eternity and they really stretch everything out, it was a breath of fresh air to play The Last of Us Part 1, where the game is like 10, 11 hours long, and it is a very exciting 10 or 11 hours. The game does not overstay its welcome. It does not stretch anything out, and it is just set piece after set piece, big moment after big moment. The pacing is excellent in this game all these years later. Like, they really keep things interesting the entire time. It's really great stuff. When it comes to the presentation, it's excellent as well. It's a great looking game. Nobody's going to deny that. And the production values are just crazy good. Really, nobody's going to deny that. You just kind of can't. I mean, it looks great. It runs great on PS5. Can't say anything about the PC version. And it plays great. It has a great story. It has solid enough gameplay. There's a really good DLC in there as well. And yeah, there's a reason so many people still really hype this game up. There's a reason I gassed this game up so much. It's just a fantastic game. It's one of the greatest games ever made. It might be Naughty Dog's best game ever. And it doesn't really matter if it's the PS3, the PS4, and now the PS5. The Last of Us is still one of the best games on the console. It low-key might be the best game on this entire list, but I thought it felt really wrong to have this be the top game on the PS5 game list. So here it is in the number 2 spot. You're welcome. Maybe I shouldn't have even included the game, but The Last of Us Part 1, we all love it. We're a bit sick of it, and we kind of want a Part 3 or something new, but I mean, this game is just really, really good. But when it comes to modern Sony games, I don't think any of them are better than God of War Ragnarok, which came out in 2022. Ragnarok really builds on the 2018 game in many aspects to be maybe the best God of War game of them all. Like, I love the older God of War games, especially God of War 3. In this game, it might be even better than that. When it comes to this game's plot and narrative, it very much is a sequel to the 2018 game, to the point where I'd say if you didn't play the 2018 game, go play that before you're going to play this, because if you don't, I think you're going to be really lost and you're going to miss out on some of this game's really big payoffs that were even teased in that 2018 game. And the story, oh, it's just so good. I don't want to give away like a single story detail here. I'll just say it's a sequel, and I really love the story. The story is just excellent. The writing is great. The characters are all awesome. There are some twists and turns that not even I expected. The story is just phenomenal. It's like the best part of this game. The bond Kratos and Atreus have is so good here, but the bond that Kratos has with several other characters is also really great, and it really expands here. And I think it's one of the best narratives we've seen in a game in the last few years. I'm not going to say it's the very best, but I really did enjoy it. Like, the story, the characters, the world building, this world in general is so interesting. It's all great stuff. When it comes to the gameplay, it isn't all that different from the 2018 game. It's an over-the-shoulder, incredibly cinematic, rather linear character action game. While there are some open areas and there are even side missions, this game is rather linear for the most part. The first thing I'll talk about is the combat. The combat is very similar to the 2018 game, but it is expanded on. Unsurprisingly, very similar to the 2018 game, but they really did expand on it. Between you and me, just you and me, I actually kind of think the 2018 game's combat is a little shallow, and this game does not have that issue. You start with all your abilities and moves from the previous game, and you get a bunch of new stuff here, and I think there's actually a good amount of depth when it comes to the combat. It's not all style, no substance, kind of like how the 2018 game was. Something I can give the 2018 game that I can absolutely give this game, though, is that it feels great. The combat feels really great. While there isn't, a massive amount of depth here, it's not Devil May Cry levels, it feels really good. All the weapons feel different, and everything just feels really nice. It's incredibly brutal and satisfying and gory, and some of the executions are just crazy cool in this game. Like, it feels and looks really nice. I think the combat is quite good. Is it the very best combat we've had in the last few years? No, and God of War 3 might have better combat at the end of the day, but I still think Ragnarok is a better feel, and it's still very good when it comes to the combat. It is incredibly capable, and they keep things interesting. Now, outside of the combat, you'll do a lot of exploring. It very much does have that modern Sony game gameplay where you climb over things, you go in between walls, you push things, do a little bit of platforming, and then there's a lot of exposition and talking in between all of this. There's a lot of storytelling, and at times the gameplay feels like it's just kind of thrown in there as an excuse for the storytelling, and all of this is fine. It's great on a first playthrough. Replaying the game, I can't exactly say it's great, but I get what they're trying to do. They're really trying to make an incredibly cinematic first experience, and the game absolutely has that. When it comes to this game's puzzles, I think it's fine enough. They're all relatively basic, and none of them really stump me. That and the characters pretty much tell you what to do almost immediately if you take more than 2 minutes. I always thought that was kind of annoying, but the puzzles didn't get to the old God of War levels of annoying. And then, as I alluded to earlier, not all of the game is stupid linear. Most of the game is very linear. It's low-key straight lines, but there are plenty of areas where you can not only branch off and go in a different path, but there's actually open areas to explore. You even get side quests, and the side quests are all meaningful. There's a bunch of great moments that Kratos and Atreus have that are only in side quests, and it very much is one of those games where I think it really is worth it to do the side quests. Just for the story beats alone, I think the side quests are worth doing. Unsurprisingly, this is a great looking game. The game just looks incredible, really by every metric. The environments are fantastic, the character models are so realized, the animation is great, the frame rate is super smooth, it has all the production values in the world, and I even got to be part of it, so that's pretty cool. It's a great looking game. The soundtrack's really epic, the voice acting is great, the sound effects are really visceral and gory, the sound design is just really solid in general. And all of this leads to Ragnarok being one of those must-play PS5 experiences. If you have a PS5, I think this game should be on your list. Even if you don't love God of War or hack and slash games, or you just want to play shooters all day, I implore you, try the 2018 game. If you really hate it, I guess you could skip it. You're going to be a bit lost, but Ragnarok is just a fantastic game. It really lives up to the hype, and I really think that it's just a great game that is worth your time. Does it have some flaws? Yeah, it has some flaws. It does fall in some of the modern trappings of AAA games, with it being incredibly cinematic and some less than exciting moments, but I would still say the pacing is excellent throughout. There is just so many amazing moments here that I'm just like, oh yeah, it all pays off. It's totally worth it. The story and the characters, man, this shit is so good, and I really can't wait to see what they do next. We did see a little glimpse of that with that free DLC that is also crazy good. That free DLC is way better than it has any right to be, man. That helps it solidify its #1 spot on this list. That DLC is actually worth playing as well. It's literally free, so you got no excuse not to try it. The game's great, and the DLC is great too. And that's all I'm going to talk about for this game. This video has gone on long enough. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope it was what you're looking for and not full of a bunch of shit takes. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you made it to this part of the video, I'm going to give you a little code word that you made it to the end. You'll get a heart from me. That code word is Hamtaro, as in that old anime series. That's how code work. You get a heart from me. Love you very much. Hope you all have a wonderful day, night, holiday, weekend, whatever the hell's closest to you. I don't care. Tomorrow's going to be a good day. I can assure you that. See y'all later. Bye-bye now.